Pixelkin.
I wanted to talk to you a bit about your experience gaming with your kids and then also how that ties into your interest in education. So I guess I'll start with your gaming history and like how you first started getting into gaming.
Yeah. So I wasn't a gamer as a kid at all. I did have an Atari, and I played lots of Frogger and Space Invaders and stuff like that. I of course grew up in the very very early days of games, and so, when Pizza Parlor still had tabletop game consoles with little red ashtrays on them. But I also never kind of got into it because I didn't have it at home, so everyone was better than me. No one likes to lose, right? That's no fun. So I even didn't even want to play when I was at friends' houses. And then I had kids, and my kids started to play games, and they started to. I think first they started to play iPad games. Then eventually I got them a DS, and they would play on the DS. And then they got a Wii, and we started to play on the Wii. And around some point, I started to ask questions and go, "Well, this is cool. I'm not against the games, but I do want to know what they're learning. And I do want to figure out, how do I, as a parent, need to sit with them and talk about these games that they're playing, right? In the same way I talk about a movie or a TV show, right? Like the best thing we can do as parents is talk to our kids about how they're playing." And what they're playing. And so I started to look at these games really critically, and I started to apply my background, which is in psychology and philosophy, to games, and I ended up writing a book called Free Play, a video game guide to maximum euphoric bliss. And it was about how to think about the underlying psychological messages that are in games. I did it kind of half as a joke, like it's kind of half comedy, the book, half kind of self-help, but
Yeah.
people came out of the woodwork and they said, "Oh my God, somebody's writing about games in a way that's not just reviews." It was like, what happens when you don't have a geek writing about games? So after that, people just started calling me and telling me about what they were doing, and I got more and more interested in it. I started to learn about the games that are made just for learning. I started to meet people building the social impact games, and so that's my history, and that's how I got to where I am today, which is still very much, I want to know, I want to ask a lot of questions about how games are going to shape the way we think, or how they're already shaping the way we think, or what they can tell us about how our thinking has already changed.
Yeah.
But I come to it very much from a philosophical, psychological standpoint of trying to understand the stories, trying to understand the narrative aspect of video games.
It's always very interesting when someone who hasn't like been entrenched in that medium comes in and then with the fresh perspective kind of sheds new light on things. So
Yeah.
you wouldn't say that you went in with a mission to educate people about video games. Was there a point when things changed and you started wanting to be an educator about games?
No, I don't. I think I've always had a mission to educate people in general, and when I say educate, I mean to make people really think about the world that they live in and how they construct their version of meaning and thoughtfulness and community and how we interact with each other in the world, and then we need to do that with a lot of attention and reflection and thought. As a philosopher, if I walk into tech conferences or any kind of conference except for maybe a philosophy conference and go, "Hey, let's talk about how we think about the world," people roll their eyes. When I go, "Hey, let's talk about how video games make us think about the world," everyone goes, "Oh, that's kind of interesting." So kind of tricky in some ways. In some ways, I'm kind of using this particular entry point because for a much larger mission, I think.
Okay.
But I don't want to trivialize the games in that mission either. I mean, they're just as important as if I were to come at it from novels, or if I was to come at it from movies, or if I was to come at it from technology. I think they're a really significant part of our culture, and therefore a good place to enter a question of how do we want to learn, how do we want to think about our world, and how do we want to educate our kids.
There's definitely a lot of space there, I think, in that niche for exploiting the meaning that games bring to our life.
Yeah.
But do you find it hard to communicate the importance of that to people that aren't familiar with games? And do you think there's a cultural bias against video games being explored in this philosophical way?
I think there's much less of a cultural bias than there used to be. I don't get much resistance, although many people go, "Oh, I've never thought about it that way." I think there was a bias for many years that kept anyone from thinking about games at all. That they were just a trivial waste of time. That they were the equivalent of a soap opera. Not that we should be thinking about soap operas too, but we don't. And I think that they were approaching video games that way. And so I find that nobody's resistant when I say, "Let's talk about this," but they are. But they haven't put that kind of thought into it before. It's new to a lot of people to hear me talk about games in the way that I do, including a lot of game designers.
Definitely. We were reading when you were talking about being on a plane and playing Yoshi's Island and realizing that everyone around you is also playing games, and I'm thinking about that like cultural shift to where even people who aren't your kids, aren't kids with DSs playing games. They're all playing games in some way. It's really interesting. Do you think that parents are becoming more open to that specifically?
I think that we have become so accustomed to interacting with technology in a kind of back and forth way, right? Like when I read the newspaper, I read it online now, and it involves clicking and responding, and I think that what was initially foreign was the idea that we go like this and the game responds back, but now all day we all go like this and the world responds back. So I think that it's no longer this kind of it no longer has the kind of foreignness in its kind of human procedural sense, right? Like it's you kind of imagine, I think about if you come from another planet and you suddenly see a car, you don't know how to interact with it, right? But now it's so normal. The idea of interacting with a screen, of interacting through controllers, of kind of that action and response that is, that on its most basic level is Pong, right?
Yeah.
That's our whole day now.
On a similar note, actually, we were reading I think it was a University of Missouri study that the upcoming generation of adults is kind of less concerned about violence in games, just because I think they've been so accustomed to it growing up. And you've said that you don't like to play first-person shooter games with your kids. And I'm wondering, I'd like to talk to you a little more about that, and then I'd also like to know what you do like to play with your kids.
Okay. Yeah, so I often write that, and I sometimes get nasty comments when I do write it, because I don't like the first-person shooters, but I also don't like the kind of simple causal thinking that goes games cause violence. But I do think that first-person shooters, especially the hyper-realistic ones, I mean, Space Invaders is essentially a first-person shooter, and it's not horribly violent, so that's fine. But I'm talking much more Call of Duty. And I'm really talking about the first-person shooters that's about people, because actually I have played Halo with my kids, because they're kind of robots and aliens and not humans. But I think there is, no matter what, games do shape psychology. They do shape our conscious attitudes, and so there's certain things that are not good. In the same way that I wouldn't let my 8-year-old go boxing, right? And not just because of the physical harm, but because I don't let him go to a shooting range, right? And not because I'm afraid, just because I'm afraid he'll shoot himself. I don't think it's age appropriate yet, right? I do think there's a point at which they're not at all dangerous or bad or negative. But for little kids, I think there are age-appropriate things, whether that they're not necessarily capable yet, even with my guidance, to contextualize the kind of messaging that they're getting in a way that makes sense in the world. Or at least I'm not prepared for the amount of time it would take to do it, right? Like I don't think movies with explicit sex are bad. Sex is not a bad thing. But I also don't show them to my 8-year-old because I don't think they're ready to have the conversation yet to make sense of it. But as an adult, I don't think anyone's hurt by watching movies with sex scenes, right? I don't think they're negative in that way.
I think that's a really good point. That I remember reading your article about mediating screen time. I think I wrote the abstract on that one, but just like that, sometimes you need to sit back and do your own thing and let your kids have the screen time. But so if you are like letting them have the screen time with the first-person shooter, you need to be there to contextualize that, and it becomes no longer a casual activity. It becomes something that you have to work really hard for. So I like the.
I mean, you need to contextualize everything.
Yeah.
I mean, we kind of forget that. We let the TV do most of it, and we shouldn't. But they're blank slates, and they need to be taught how to understand everything they do. When our kids get in a fight in the playground, we talk to them about it, what it means, and what would have been better behaviors, and what they, and how they could have dealt with it differently, right? Well, we kind of forget that we also have to do that for every circumstance they're in, right? And one of those circumstances is the games that they play, and we have to go, why do you, what does it mean to play this? What is it saying? What's the best way for you to handle it? We often forget that because the TV, in some ways, has kind of conditioned us all to think we just turn it on and ignore it.
Mm-hmm. All right. So then what are the games that you do enjoy playing with your kids, and what do you think that they've had the most fun with?
Yeah, so it's a tough question. My children and I are super fortunate because being a game writer, we get games, we don't have to buy games anymore. They just come to our house, or we play them months before they come out at studios. Right now, we're really into Donkey Kong Country, the new Donkey Kong Country game from Nintendo. My 6-year-old and I have been playing it nonstop. It's a very hard platformer that just keeps going, and that's what it is right now. I will, kind of whatever's new, we get in and we play it for a long time. We've still been going on Lego City Undercover for months. I mean, that's another great game. And then there's, of course, my kids are totally absorbed into Minecraft, like every kid on the planet right now. I don't understand it myself. I mean, I kind of understand it. I ask them about it. They explain it to me. I watch over their shoulders to make sure, that they're not doing anything that they need to talk about with their dad, especially because they're chatting with people all over the world while they do it. So, and again, it's not me putting a limit, but making sure whether or not something's happening and requires conversation. Yeah, that's a lot of it. My 8-year-old just started to get into The Sims a little bit, so I'm excited to play with Sim EDU. I don't know if you guys know, Glass Lab just came out with Sim EDU, which is based on this kind of, you have to build a city and make it environmentally sustainable.
Oh.
And you're the mayor, and you have to decide, like, what do I do to make it more energy efficient and more. So I'm kind of excited to play that with him. I haven't shown that to him, but he's also into the show Cosmos. So I kind of like the idea of kind of getting a science game to him.
That's an interesting position, I think, because that you're in a position where the games are coming to you, whereas other parents have to seek them out and kind of do the test what they like and what their kids are interested in. Do you have any advice for people who are in that position where they have to do the research and find games for their kids to play?
Yeah, I mean that is part of the hard part. Luckily, there's YouTube where you can watch. Pretty much it takes about 3 hours after a game comes out to find someone who's done a playthrough on YouTube. So you can always watch it ahead of time and see how you feel about it. Your site is a really good one to show you the games. And I used to write a lot more reviews than I do, but there's a lot of people out there doing it. But I think I would just say YouTube. Like, it yourself. But again, I want to emphasize this. Like, the question isn't, are they good for your kids or bad for your kids? They're games. They're not good for your kids or bad for your kids. They're just there. The question is, do you feel comfortable having the conversation with your kids that you need to have in order for this game to have a positive impact on their development?
It's all about active parenting and being there, and being there.
I mean, the truth is, I know I write about it, and it probably gives people the impression that my kids never play without me next to them, which is not at all true. I don't think they've ever played a game that they can play with me for some amount of time, but they do a lot more of it by themselves than with me.
Have you ever experienced a negative reaction from parents when you're talking about video games and education?
Yeah, a lot of them just don't believe that it's possible, right? There's the old stigma, and it's just a waste of time. That's kind of par for the course.
It happens.
I don't spend that much time trying to convince them, but I want to. I want them to see that that when you trivialize these things, you're losing learning opportunities, right? It's not about good or bad. I mean, you're losing learning opportunities. Now, there's also the other side that you're asking about, which is people who don't, when we're talking about game-based learning and games that are specifically designed for classroom usage, right? And yeah, I actually think there's a lot less resistance to that. Most people I talk to believe in the game's power to teach, and most of the resistance I find is much more about not knowing how to integrate it into a classroom, right? Or fear that it's going to change the classroom to such a degree that the teacher won't know how to do it anymore, or the teacher not knowing how to align it with the curriculum. But very little kind of, oh, that's not real learning. A lot of times people will say things to me like, well, once kids start to learn math from DragonBox, they're never going to listen to their teacher anymore. You know, that's just not, well, I mean, my response to that is usually, if that's true, they have bad teachers. That's not DragonBox's fault, right? Like, do a better job teaching, they'll pay attention to you.
So do you think that when there is that, I guess in a classroom setting, the teacher is the expert, are parents more comfortable then with the idea of using games in an educational sense when there is that expert person present, rather than when, you know, maybe if the game is in their home, maybe the parents don't feel confident enough to be able to engage their kids with it? Do you see that as a problem? That was a convoluted question.
I mean, the interesting thing is if you read a lot of the surveys that like the Joan Ganz Cooney Center has done, they've discovered that although parents download a ton of educational games, they don't believe they're working.
Okay.
But they buy them for their kids, and they think that they're learning all the time. And I get questions, you know, like at least once a week, there's a question in my Facebook messages from someone I haven't seen in like 15 years that goes, I see you write about games all the time. I have a 3-year-old. Is there a good app that'll teach a 3-year-old to read? And I usually write something like, yeah, sure, here's an app that'll teach the kid to read. Of course, the caveat is you're going to have to dedicate all your time to writing about games, talking about games, and playing games with your kids. And then they'll learn really well from the games, and you won't have to do anything else. Right, because my kids have learned a ton from games, but they didn't learn. But they've had me next to them the whole time. They haven't, so it's, you know, it's not a fair model. It's a supplement. It's not, you know, the worst thing people can start to imagine is that we're going to replace education with video games. Right? That's not it. I don't know anyone who wants to do that. I know a ton of people who want to say, can't we come up with a bunch of great tools that can supplement what teachers already do? Like, you know, they have chalkboards, they have project-based learning, they have quizzes, they have little, I know kindergartners have math manipulatives, the little rods and tiles and stuff, and what people want to do is they want to say, can we also add a video game into there, right? Not, can we replace algebra? You know, even DragonBox, I know the guy who made that really well, and he would never say, this game eliminates the need for algebra teachers. What he would say is, this game enables algebra teachers to do their job a lot quicker and a lot more effectively and with a lot more depth of, you know, hopefully give students a much deeper depth of algebraic understanding, because you don't have to spend months just teaching them operations.
Yeah. Even when I was watching I was watching a video of DragonBox, and I was thinking this would be so useful for people who learn differently. So with math, I've always had a lot of trouble with it, and when I saw the visualization of it, it made me wish that had existed when I was in school, personally. So I hope that, human interaction is not going to go away, but I hope that the students who learn differently will be able to engage with these games to help them through the class.
And I think we should not just say students who learn differently. I think we should say all students. I mean, all students learn in different ways. And I don't mean different from each other. I mean, all students learn in many different ways. And I think the most important thing is to be able to present the information in many different ways as possible, so that students learn. You know, often the things that we say we're not good at are the things that are not easy for us, and that's a very different thing, right? Like, Like you say you're not good at math, but that just means it got hard at some point, right? You
Hmm.
got at a place where it was a lot of work. You might actually be great at it, but you'd much rather do the things that are easier, right?
Very true.
And we often confuse that. So I think if we could have 6 different ways to present math to you as a student, then you might discover that there's an entry point that's easiest for you, and then very quickly understand all the other ways they taught you. Instead, we expect the same entry point for everyone. Everybody should
Exactly.
learn how to do algebra on paper, I think, right? But some people it might be better to start with a video game and then transfer it to paper. For some people, it might be better to start with paper and then move to a video game.
Exactly. I definitely agree. And what do you think the biggest change will be in the coming years for games in education?
We can only barely imagine the change because I think it is so huge. The amount of data that games are able to collect about the way, and not just, this has absolutely nothing to do with games, honestly, just computers. The amount of data that computers can collect about how people are learning. So, like, if we take this in a really simple example, right? If you remember Space Invaders, right? The best strategy in Space Invaders is you go all the way to the right side and you shoot at the right side because as long as one doesn't get to go down another line, they can't go faster, right? So you want to keep shooting before they get to the next line and go across, and then they don't get faster; they just stay the same speed. Um, so well, a computer can analyze how long it took you to get to that, to learn that strategy. And a computer can analyze what you tried first and in what order and what things gave you the hints that told you to do that strategy. Now imagine that game's teaching math and the computer can analyze exactly what order you did that. That's a really simple, kind of dumb example, but now imagine if we had that much data about how kids are learning algebra, how they're learning to read, how they're learning basic arithmetic. We're going to learn so much about learning in the coming years that's going to enable us to build curriculums, software, and just learn new ways of teaching face-to-face that are going to be so much more powerful just because we're suddenly able to collect real-time data and that we can analyze and study. And I think that's going to be huge. I think that's the biggest change. It's not like, has very little to do with, I mean, we could never use another piece of technology to teach again after that. I think we'll learn so much.
Do you have a current favorite approach to games-based learning that you've seen in classrooms?
Um, okay. Imagine you have a class of first graders, okay, and you're trying to teach them basic arithmetic, very simple basic arithmetic, and you have 3 kids who got it in 15 seconds, right, and you have all the rest of the class that's really struggling. Well, I have a first grader, so I'll tell you what happens. That first grader that gets it is really bored, and so he starts to distract everyone else, or she starts to distract everyone else and touch their neighbor and poke their neighbor and play games because they're just bored. Because how many times are you going to say, "What's 2 plus 2 to me? I get it. I'm done. Can I go play?" Okay. So what ends up happening often is really good teachers in the early years, they create stations, right? So they go, okay, you're going to go play with the geometry manipulatives while I continue to work directly with these people who need more direct, personal, face-to-face, one-on-one support to learn arithmetic. Well, that's fine, except for what happens is you tell those 3 first graders, I want you to build a hexagon. And they build 1 hexagon, and then they go, now let's just play spaceships with these blocks. And it becomes this kind of like they're in a holding pattern while you're adjusting everyone else. What if you could put them in front of a game that either drills the arithmetic or starts to teach the foundation of the next lesson while they're doing it, right? So they can be off, or the other way around. You want to work on the next lesson with the kids who are a little faster, but you don't want all the other kids in the kind of play, they're just in free time. So what could you do that at least gives them kind of half a teacher while you're working, while the other kids have a full teacher, right? I mean, think about it more in that way. Certainly playing a game is not going to replace a teacher, but it might do a little more than just kids playing stuffed animals in the corner.
That's really interesting. Yeah, something that reinforces and helps strengthen the skills that are
Yeah,
being
and
built.
it's fun. I mean, and my kids love in my kids' school they use ST Math, which is, do you know ST Math?
I no ST.
ST Math is it comes from a place called the Mind Research Institute, and it uses a penguin and no words to teach math,
Uh-huh.
and they love it, right? Yeah, they only love it for 20 minutes at a time, but they love it, and so but that's 20 minutes that their teacher can spend with people who need really one-on-one stuff for whatever reason. Maybe some kids just had a fight and you need to like do some serious conflict resolution. What do you do with the other kids? No, you want them in a holding pattern or you want them working on math? Well, you can put workbooks in front of 5-year-olds all day long. They're not going to work for more than 5 minutes.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Thank you. We've talked a bit about that fear that machines are going to replace teachers and stuff, and I think you really have a handle on what does make people afraid about advances in technology. What have you found is the best way to kind of address these fears that people have?
Um,
Is there a way? Can we ever win?
um, I mean, I think they're starting to get it. I think it's just I mean, I think the problem is there's still a lot of people who do believe that technology is going to replace humans.
Yeah.
So you're not actually just fighting against a wrong conception. There's a lot of people who are confused. I'm constantly saying in interviews, okay, a video game, a game-based learning is the same as a chalkboard. Doesn't matter how, like, if you don't have a good teacher, the chalkboard's useless. If you don't have a good teacher, and that's usually the approach I take. I go, like, I don't believe I can put a kid in front of a machine and they're going to learn, right? You can't put a kid in front of a piano and expect them to learn to play the piano, although they'll learn something about music, right? Keith Devlin talks about this, who's the NPR math guy. We need to design games that are like instruments for exactly that reason. That I can hand my kid a guitar. They'll learn something about harmony. They'll learn something about dissonance and resonance.
Mm-hmm.
But they need a teacher to learn how to make music.
Yeah.
Right, so if we build games that are doing that, they become kind of math. He's trying to build games. He's got a great one called Was It Trouble. That is, he considers it a math instrument. And you can play it, you'll learn something, but you sit with him and he'll show you how much you know about numbers theory just because you learned it. I've listened to him do it and gone, my God, I can't believe how much abstract math conception my son has at 8 years old. Now, my son can't say it, but when he spends 20 minutes with Keith, he gets it.
All right. I think that's it for me. Thank you so much for talking with me today. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.